My name is Edward Miller. Every day, I share real-life stories of pain, betrayal, and powerful new beginnings. You can also send us your own story to be told here. Let's begin today's story. At my granddaughter's wedding, I found my name tag and it read, "The Old Man Footing the Bill." I'm glad you're here. Follow this story to the very end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this tale has traveled. I have always held the conviction that family celebrations are meant to be cherished moments of pure joy. My granddaughter Clara's wedding was supposed to be one of those idyllic days, the kind of memory that brings a gentle warmth to your heart whenever you recall it. Instead, it became the day I finally understood how my own family truly perceived me. The morning of the wedding, I took some extra time getting ready. At 70, I'm not a man given to vanity, but I wanted to present my best self. I selected a fine charcoal suit that Eleanor, my late wife, had always said she loved, styled my silver hair meticulously, and even applied a small amount of the cologne she had given me for our final anniversary, before a sudden illness took her from me 3 years ago. "You look handsome, Arthur," I murmured to my reflection, easily imagining Eleanor saying those exact words. I could almost hear the soft cadence of her voice, feel her reassuring presence right beside me. The ceremony at St. Jude's Chapel was simply beautiful. Clara was a vision of radiance as she walked down the aisle, her face absolutely luminous with happiness. My son David beamed with paternal pride as he escorted her, and even my daughter-in-law, Susan, appeared to be genuinely moved by the occasion. For those few fleeting moments, everything felt perfectly in its place. It was at the reception that the perfect picture began to shatter. I arrived at the grand ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel and made my way toward the check-in table where the guests were picking up their name tags and table assignments. A pleasant young woman at the table offered a smile as she sorted through the alphabetized cards. "Here you are, Mr. Beaumont," she said with a cheerful tone, handing me my name tag. I glanced down at it, fully expecting to see the words, "Arthur Beaumont, grandfather of the bride." Instead, inscribed in an elegant, flowing script, were the words, "The old man who's paying for everything." My hand froze in midair. This had to be some sort of mistake, a poorly judged prank. "Is there something wrong?" the young woman inquired, her smile faltering as she noticed my expression. I managed to force a smile of my own. "It appears there's been a little mix-up with my name tag." She leaned over the table to get a better look. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, I am so terribly sorry. Let me check if there's a correct one for you." "It's quite all right," I said quickly, wanting to avoid creating a scene at Clara's wedding. "I'll have a word with my family about it." I reluctantly pinned the insulting tag to the lapel of my suit and proceeded into the ballroom, my face burning with a deep sense of humiliation. Had Clara approved this? David? Susan? Who could possibly have thought this was appropriate, let alone humorous? Throughout the cocktail hour, I did my best to enjoy myself, engaging in conversation with other guests who either didn't notice the tag on my lapel or were simply too polite to mention it. Then, I happened to overhear a conversation that sent a chill down my spine. "Did you get a look at the grandfather's name tag?" someone whispered, followed by a muffled snicker. "Susan said they thought it would be hysterical," another voice replied. "Apparently, he's their personal cash machine." I moved away from the group quickly, my hands beginning to shake. Just then, David spotted me and waved me over to a group of well-dressed individuals. "Dad," he called out, his voice booming across the room. "Come and meet the Hamiltons. My father used to play golf with Bill." I approached the group with a sense of reluctance. Bill Hamilton did look vaguely familiar. Perhaps one of Eleanor's business contacts. "Dad, this is Bill and Martha Hamilton," David said, and then added with a loud laugh, "Dad, our walking bank account." Martha Hamilton's smile wavered for a moment as her eyes fell upon my name tag. Bill looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Arthur Beaumont," I said, my voice firm as I extended my hand. "Eleanor's widower." "Of course," Bill said with genuine kindness. "Eleanor spoke of you often. She was exceptionally proud of you." The conversation carried on, but I was barely able to register the words. When the Hamiltons had moved on, I pulled David aside. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing directly at the name tag. David just laughed. "Oh, Dad, don't be so sensitive. It's just a little joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deep pockets since Mom left you everything." "It's humiliating, David," I said in a quiet voice. "Oh, honestly," he said, rolling his eyes. "Lighten up. It's a party." Before I could formulate a response, Susan appeared, looking elegant in her mother-of-the-bride dress. "There you are, Arthur. Has David been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who is responsible for this magnificent wedding." She winked, and they both shared a laugh. I excused myself and made my way to the men's room, needing a moment to myself. As I was splashing cold water on my face, the door opened, and an older gentleman in a well-tailored suit entered, then quickly backed out, offering an apology. "Mr. Beaumont, Arthur," he called out tentatively from the hallway. "It's Martin Harrison, Eleanor's attorney. Might I have a word with you?" I composed myself and stepped out into the hall. Mr. Harrison had handled Eleanor's estate and had always treated me with kindness and respect. "I couldn't help but notice," he began, gesturing vaguely toward my name tag, "and some of the comments." I let out a heavy sigh. Apparently, it's just a joke. Mr. Harrison's expression grew stern. "It is not funny," and Eleanor would have been absolutely furious. He paused for a moment, then lowered his voice. "There's something you ought to know. Something Eleanor insisted I not tell you unless it became absolutely necessary." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is a codicil to Eleanor's will." She added it shortly before she passed. I took it with trembling fingers and opened it. The legal terminology was dense, but the core meaning was unmistakable. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me would be completely disinherited from their share of Eleanor's fortune. A fortune that was significantly larger than even I had been aware of. I looked up at Mr. Harrison, completely stunned. Why wouldn't she have told me about this? "She hoped it would never be necessary," Mr. Harrison said quietly. "She wanted them to treat you with respect because they loved you, not because they were afraid of losing their inheritance." I glanced back toward the ballroom, where my family was celebrating, completely oblivious to the fact that their behavior had just jeopardized millions of dollars. "What do you want to do, Arthur?" Mr. Harrison asked. I carefully folded the document and handed it back to him. "Nothing. Not yet. I need to see just how far they are willing to go." As I re-entered the reception, the name tag felt heavier on my lapel. But now, instead of shame, I felt a different emotion stirring within me. It was a firm resolve to finally see my family for who they truly were. The morning after Clara's wedding, I sat by myself at my kitchen table, still in my dressing gown, staring at the offensive name tag I had placed on the table in front of me. The elegant calligraphy seemed to mock me. "The old man who's paying for everything." I traced the letters with the tip of my finger, imagining how Eleanor would have reacted if she had seen it. Her temper was a rare sight, but it was a formidable force when someone showed disrespect to those she loved. "They've changed," I whispered into the empty room, as if Eleanor could somehow hear me. "Or perhaps they were always this way, and we just refused to see it." I rose and walked into the living room, my eyes drawn to the large family portrait hanging above the fireplace. It had been taken 5 years ago, on our 40th anniversary. Eleanor was seated in the center, looking as vibrant as ever despite the early signs of the illness that would later claim her life. I stood beside her, my hand resting on her shoulder. David and Susan were on either side of us, with Clara and her brother Leo, then just teenagers, standing in the front. We all looked so happy. We looked like a family. When, exactly, had things started to change? The question gnawed at me as I prepared my morning coffee. Perhaps the change had been gradual, a subtle erosion of respect that I hadn't noticed until it was far too late. The first clear memory that came to mind was from just 6 months after Eleanor's funeral. David and Susan had invited me to dinner, which was a rare event even back then. They had been unusually attentive that evening, asking about my well-being and sharing fond memories of Eleanor. Then, over dessert, they finally revealed the true purpose of the evening. "Dad," David had said, refilling my wine glass, "Susan and I have been thinking about remodeling our kitchen. Nothing extravagant, just updating the appliances, new countertops, that sort of thing." "That sounds lovely," I had replied, completely oblivious to what was about to come. "The thing is," Susan continued smoothly, "with college tuition for the kids and everything else, we're a bit stretched thin right now." I remembered the pregnant pause, the expectant looks on their faces. "Are you asking me for money?" "Not asking exactly," David had said quickly. "It's just that Mom left you so comfortable, and we thought perhaps you'd want to help out the family." I had written them a check for $30,000 that very evening. Looking back now, that was the moment it all began. Small requests soon became larger ones. A kitchen remodel turned into a full home renovation. Help with tuition evolved into luxury cars for both Clara and Leo when they turned 18. Family vacations that I was always invited to join were also vacations I was expected to fund. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a large box filled with financial records. Sitting on the floor like a student, I began to sort through years of bank statements and canceled checks. The evidence of my financial support for David and Susan's lifestyle was overwhelming. Over the course of 3 years, I had given them nearly $250,000. The phone rang, startling me from my calculations. It was Susan. "Arthur, are you home? I've been trying your cell." I hadn't even realized my phone was still in my suit jacket from the night before. "Yes, I'm home. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. David and I just wanted to thank you again for everything yesterday. Wasn't the wedding just beautiful?" "Yes, it was lovely," I said. "Clara and Simon are so grateful for your generosity. They couldn't have had such a wonderful wedding without you." I closed my eyes, recalling the $45,000 check I'd written to cover the venue and catering. I was happy to help. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," Susan continued, her voice adopting that syrupy, sweet quality I had come to recognize all too well. "Simon's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but his father's business has been struggling lately, and they've had to back out. Clara is just devastated." I could hear exactly where this was going. "We were wondering if you might be able to help them out. They have their hearts set on 2 weeks in Bali. David and I would contribute, of course, but with everything we spent on the wedding, everything they spent, I had covered nearly all of it." "I'll think about it," I said, surprising both of us with my non-committal reply. There was a brief silence on the other end. "Oh, well, they need to book it soon to get the best rates." "I understand. I'll let you know tomorrow." After hanging up the phone, I returned to my financial archaeology. Eleanor had always expressed concerns about David's relationship with money. He sees it as the solution to every problem, she had told me once. But money without values just ends up creating more problems. I hadn't fully understood her words back then, or perhaps I simply hadn't wanted to. A knock at the front door startled me. Through the peephole I saw Leo, my grandson, shifting nervously on the porch. I quickly gathered the scattered financial papers and shoved them back into the closet before opening the door. "Grandpa," he said, stepping forward to give me a hug. At 21, he was tall like me, with the same kind eyes Eleanor had. "Are you okay? I've been texting you." "I'm fine, my boy. Just a bit tired after yesterday. Please, come in." He followed me into the kitchen, where I put the kettle on for some fresh tea. Leo had always been different from the rest of them, more thoughtful and less preoccupied with appearances and status. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday," he said, taking a seat at the table. "The name tag, the way everyone was talking, it just wasn't right." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "You noticed?" Of course I noticed. A lot of people did. He looked down at his hands, clearly embarrassed. I should have said something. I patted his hand. "It's not your responsibility to correct your parents, but it is my responsibility to stand up for what's right." He looked at me directly. "Dad and Mom, they've changed since Grandma died. Or maybe I just didn't see it before. All they ever talk about is money. Your money, specifically." "What do you mean?" Leo hesitated. "Last week, I overheard them talking about your house. Dad said something about how it's too big for one person and how they could help you downsize." The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to process this new piece of information. As I poured the hot water over the tea bags, my mind went back to Mr. Harrison and the codicil to Eleanor's will. I thought about the name tag, the endless requests for money, and now this apparent scheme to move me out of my own home. "Grandpa," Leo's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you sure you're okay?" I set the teapot on the table and sat down across from him. "I'm better than okay, Leo. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in years." "What do you mean by that?" I smiled, a decision solidifying in my mind. "Just that it's time for a few changes around here." As we sipped our tea, I found myself studying my grandson's face, wondering if he was truly different from his parents, or if the seeds of entitlement were simply lying dormant, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. For the first time since Eleanor passed away, I felt a cold clarity, replacing my grief and loneliness. I wouldn't be making any rash decisions, but I would be watching, observing, and waiting to see who in my family truly deserved the legacy Eleanor had left behind. 3 days after the wedding, David and Susan organized a post-wedding brunch at their country club. I debated whether I should attend, but ultimately my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see if the name tag incident had been a one-time misjudgment or part of a larger, more troubling pattern. I arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club dressed in a simple but elegant navy blazer and gray trousers that Eleanor had always said made me look distinguished. As I stepped into the private dining room, I recognized several guests from the wedding, including Clara and her new husband, Simon, Leo, and various other relatives and friends. "Dad, over here," David called out, waving me toward the head table. Susan, resplendent in a designer dress that likely cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, gave me a kiss on the cheek that didn't quite land. "Arthur, you look nice," she said, her tone laced with a hint of mild surprise. "We saved you a seat right here." I settled into the offered chair, noting with some annoyance that I had been placed next to Simon's parents, whom I hardly knew, rather than near my own grandchildren. The brunch proceeded pleasantly enough until Susan clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. "We want to thank all of you for being here today and for helping to make Clara and Simon's wedding so very special," she began. "And of course, a very special thank you to Grandpa Arthur, who has been so incredibly generous." All eyes in the room turned toward me. "In fact," Susan continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "we have some exciting news. Grandpa will be funding Clara and Simon's dream honeymoon to Bali." A smattering of polite applause followed her announcement. I sat there frozen, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I had made no such commitment. "Dad," David prompted, when I failed to immediately acknowledge the announcement. I carefully set my cup back down on its saucer. "This is the first I'm hearing of it," I said, my voice steady and level. An awkward silence descended upon the table. Clara looked confused, then deeply embarrassed. Simon stared intently at his plate. "Well, we discussed it yesterday," Susan said with a brittle laugh. "Remember, you said you'd think about it." "Yes, I did say that, and I am still thinking about it." David leaned over, speaking in a stage whisper that was clearly intended for everyone at the table to hear. "Dad, don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip." I felt something inside me snap, a thread of patience that had been stretched too far for too long. "I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon to Bali," I said, my voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "In fact, I believe Simon's parents were originally planning to cover this expense." Simon's father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "There were some business setbacks," he muttered. "I understand," I said kindly. "These things happen. But I think it's highly inappropriate to publicly volunteer someone else's money without their explicit agreement, don't you?" The table fell completely silent. Susan's face flushed a deep shade of red. "Perhaps Clara and Simon might consider a more modest honeymoon," I suggested. "One that is within their own means." "Their means?" Susan hissed. "What about your means? Everyone knows Eleanor left you more than comfortable." Something in her tone, the sheer entitlement, the thinly veiled resentment, made my decision crystal clear. "My financial situation is not a topic for public discussion," I said firmly. "And neither are my spending choices." David grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Dad, stop it. You're embarrassing us." I pulled my arm away from his grasp. "No, David, you have embarrassed yourselves." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "Clara, Simon, I wish you both a lifetime of happiness. I would be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, but that is a conversation I will have with you privately." As I turned to leave, Leo stood up as well. "I'll walk you out, Grandpa." In the lobby, away from the prying eyes of the other guests, I finally allowed my composure to slip. My hands trembled as I fumbled in my pocket for my car keys. "Are you okay to drive?" Leo asked gently. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm fine, just a bit shaken." "You should be proud of yourself. That took a lot of courage." I looked at my grandson, really looked at him. In that moment, he reminded me so much of Eleanor that it made my heart ache. "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight?" I asked impulsively. Leo smiled. "I'd like that very much." Later that evening, as we sat in my kitchen sharing a simple meal of roast chicken, I found myself confiding in Leo about his parents' behavior over the past 3 years, the constant financial demands, the gradual erosion of respect. "I'm not surprised," he said sadly. "I've watched it happening. After Grandma died, it was like they started to see you as, I don't know." "An ATM?" I supplied. He nodded grimly. "And it's getting worse. Last week, I overheard them talking about your house again." "What did they say?" Leo hesitated. "They were discussing how to convince you to move into Silver Pines, the retirement home." I was stunned. My house was my sanctuary, filled with a lifetime of memories of the life Eleanor and I had built together. Dad said it would be better for everyone if you downsized. He mentioned something about the real estate market being hot right now and how they could help you maximize your investment. I felt sick to my stomach. They weren't just after my money, they wanted my home as well. Leo, there's something I need to tell you, I said, deciding in that moment to trust him with the truth about Eleanor's codicil. But before I could continue, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see David's car parked in the driveway. "It's your father," I said. Leo's expression hardened. "You don't have to answer it." But I was done hiding. "No, I think it's time we cleared the air." I opened the door to find David standing there, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell was that performance at brunch today?" he demanded, pushing past me into the hallway. Then he spotted Leo. "What are you doing here?" "Having dinner with my grandfather," Leo replied calmly. "Something the rest of you might try sometime without asking for money." David's face darkened. "Stay out of this, Leo. This is between your grandfather and me." "No," I said firmly. "If we're going to have this conversation, Leo stays. I am tired of the private manipulations, David. Let's put everything out on the table." And in that moment, looking at my son's enraged face and my grandson's protective stance, I knew we had finally reached the breaking point. There would be no going back from this. "I have had enough of your attitude, Dad," David said, pacing my living room like a caged tiger. "First, the scene at the brunch, and now I find you've been poisoning Leo's mind against us." I sat calmly in Eleanor's old armchair, my hands folded in my lap. Leo stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, watching his father with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. "No one is poisoning anyone's mind," I replied evenly. "We are simply acknowledging what has been happening in this family since your mother died." "And what exactly is that?" David demanded. "You and Mom have been treating Grandpa like a bank, not a person," Leo said before I could answer. "The name tag at the wedding, volunteering him to pay for Clara's honeymoon without even asking him first, talking about selling his house behind his back. You've been spying on us?" David's face flushed an even darker shade of red. "I've been paying attention," Leo countered. "Something you might want to try sometime." Richard turned his attention back to me, his expression shifting to the conciliatory tone he always adopted when he wanted something. "Dad, you're misunderstanding everything. We're just trying to help you manage your finances wisely. You're not getting any younger, you know." "And I'm 70, David, not 90. I interrupted. "My mind is perfectly sharp, and I am more than capable of managing my own affairs." "But Mom left you so much." "Stop." I held up a hand. "Eleanor left me exactly what she intended to leave me. Her estate is not a family piggy bank." David's false smile vanished. "So what are you saying? You're cutting us off because Susan made one stupid joke with a name tag?" "I'm saying that from now on, I will be making my own decisions about my money and my home. If Clara and Simon want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save up for it like most young couples do. If you and Susan want a bigger house, you can work for it." David stared at me, as if I had suddenly begun speaking in a foreign language. Then he turned to Leo. "I want to speak to my father alone." "I'm staying," Leo said firmly. "This is family business," David shot back. "Exactly," Leo replied. "And I am family." Something shifted in David's expression, a quick calculation, a reassessment of the situation. He had always been able to manipulate me when we were alone, playing on my emotions, my grief for Eleanor, my deep-seated desire to keep the peace. But with Leo present as a witness, those tactics wouldn't work. Fine, he snapped, heading for the door. But this isn't over, Dad, not by a long shot. After he had gone, Leo let out a long breath. I'm sorry, Grandpa. For what, my boy? You've done nothing wrong. For not standing up to them sooner, for letting them treat you this way for so long. I rose from my chair and hugged him tightly. You're standing up now. That's what matters. After Leo left, I sat in the quiet of my home, thinking about Eleanor, about the codicil to her will, about the family we had raised together. Had we gone wrong somewhere with David? Or had he always possessed this streak of entitlement that we had simply failed to see? More importantly, what was I going to do now? The answer came to me slowly, taking shape in my mind like a photograph developing in a dark room. Instead of confronting David and Susan directly with the codicil, which would only make them change their behavior out of fear rather than genuine respect, I would simply allow them to continue showing their true colors. In the meantime, I would quietly begin to reclaim my life and my independence. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. Arthur, he answered warmly, I've been hoping to hear from you after the wedding. Yes, that's partly why I'm calling. I explained what had transpired at the brunch and David's subsequent visit. I need to understand exactly what Eleanor left in her will, Mr. Harrison. Not just the codicil, but everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Perhaps this is a conversation best had in person. Could you come to my office this afternoon? 3 hours later, I was sitting across from Mr. Harrison in his well-appointed office as he laid out the full extent of Eleanor's estate. The numbers literally took my breath away. Eleanor built several successful companies over her lifetime, Mr. Harrison explained, and she sold them at just the right moments. Her investments were extremely conservative, which means they weathered the economic downturns beautifully. I knew we were comfortable, I said faintly. But this... Eleanor was a very private person when it came to money. She didn't believe in flaunting wealth. Mr. Harrison smiled. She always said you married her when all she had was potential and a beat-up old car. She never wanted you to become one of those men who only care about designer labels and country club memberships. I laughed softly, hearing Eleanor's voice so clearly in those words. That sounds exactly like her. As for the codicil, Mr. Harrison continued, it's straightforward but incredibly powerful. Any descendant who publicly humiliates you forfeits their entire inheritance. The name tag incident at the wedding would certainly qualify. And the brunch. That too, most likely. But Arthur, you don't have to make any decisions about this right now. The codicil remains in effect for your lifetime. I nodded, thinking, what if I wanted to make some changes of my own to my will, to how my own assets are managed? Mr. Harrison leaned forward. What did you have in mind? By the time I left Mr. Harrison's office, I had a plan. There would be no dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums, just a quiet reclaiming of my life and my power. First, I called my old friend Edward, whom I hadn't seen much since Eleanor's death. We arranged to meet for lunch the following day. Then I stopped by the local community center and picked up a brochure for their adult education classes. Eleanor had always encouraged me to pursue my interest in woodworking. Perhaps it was finally time. At home, I sat down at my computer and began researching small business loans. Leo had mentioned wanting to open a combination coffee shop and bookstore after college, but was worried about the startup costs. A genuine investment in my grandson's future seemed like a perfect use of some of my resources. When my phone rang and I saw Susan's name on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. The old Arthur would have answered immediately, anxious about what new emergency or demand might be coming his way. But that Arthur was fading away, being replaced by a man who was finally recognizing his own worth. The voicemail when I listened to it later, was exactly what I had expected. "Arthur, it's Susan. David told me about your conversation last night. I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. We have always had your best interests at heart. David and I were thinking we should all have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Oh, and Clara mentioned you'd reconsidered about the honeymoon. They really need to book soon to get the best rates. Call me back." I deleted the message without a second thought. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a modest check as a wedding gift for Clara and Simon, enough for a nice honeymoon, perhaps in New England, but certainly not in Bali. I enclosed it in a card with a warm note wishing them happiness, then sealed the envelope. My silent strategy had begun. No confrontations, no drama, just quiet, firm boundaries. Eleanor would have approved. 6 months passed, in a blur of quiet but significant changes. I enrolled in a woodworking class at the community center, reconnected with old friends, and spent more time with Leo, who visited regularly. I provided him with the seed money for his coffee shop and bookstore business plan, which was coming along beautifully. Meanwhile, David and Susan's attitude toward me oscillated between a chilly distance and desperate attempts to reestablish their access to my finances. When the silent treatment failed to produce the desired results, they would suddenly appear at my doorstep with forced smiles and transparent excuses to visit. Each time, they would eventually steer the conversation toward money, a renovation they were planning, Clara's desire to buy a house with Simon, their own retirement concerns. Each time, I politely declined to engage. "I'm no longer discussing my finances," became my mantra, delivered with a smile that grew more confident with each repetition. They did not take the rejection well. Susan's texts became increasingly hostile. David's calls grew more demanding. But I had discovered a newfound strength in my silence, in the boundaries I was finally enforcing. Today was my birthday, my 71st. And despite my protests, Leo had insisted on organizing a small family gathering at my home. "It's time they remember whose house this is," he had said with a grim determination that reminded me so much of Eleanor. I spent the morning in my garden, pruning roses and drawing a sense of peace from the simple task. The garden had been another casualty of the past 3 years. I had neglected it while catering to David and Susan's endless demands. Now, it was slowly coming back to life, much like I was. By mid-afternoon, my home was ready for guests. Leo arrived early to help with the final preparations. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, arranging cheese and crackers on a platter. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing the lapels of my new blazer, a bold blue I would never have chosen before. Besides, it's just dinner. But we both knew it was more than that. This was the first time in months that the entire family would be together under my roof. David and Susan, Clara and Simon, and even a few of Eleanor's old friends, including Mr. Harrison. The doorbell rang at precisely 5 o'clock. David and Susan stood on the porch, their smiles so artificial I could almost hear the plastic stretching. "Happy birthday, Dad," David said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. "Arthur, you look different," Susan added, her eyes taking in my new blazer, my styled hair, and the general air of confidence I now carried. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping back to let them enter. Clara and Simon arrived moments later, followed by Mr. Harrison and another couple who had been close friends with Eleanor and me for decades. I moved through the greetings and small talk with a sense of composure I would have found impossible just 6 months ago. As we settled in the dining room, I couldn't help but notice David's gaze moving around the house, assessing, calculating. Susan's eyes kept returning to the new handcrafted bookshelf on the wall, a piece I had created myself in my woodworking class. "Did you redecorate, Arthur?" she asked, her tone suggesting she found the changes unsettling. "Just a few updates," I replied. "I've been taking a woodworking class." "Woodworking?" David echoed, as if I had just announced I was learning to fly to the moon. "Grandpa's really talented," Leo said proudly. "He's already sold 2 pieces at the community craft fair." "Sold?" Susan looked genuinely confused. "But why would you need to sell bookshelves?" I smiled. "It's not about need, Susan. It's about joy." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, which was thankfully broken by Simon asking about the coffee shop and bookstore Leo was planning to open. "It's coming along great," Leo said. "Thanks to Grandpa, I've got the business plan finalized and I'm currently looking at potential locations." David's head snapped up. "Thanks to Grandpa? What does that mean?" Leo met his father's gaze steadily. "Grandpa is investing in my business." "Investing?" David's voice rose. "With what money?" "My money," I said quietly. But David began, then caught himself, glancing at the other guests. "Maybe we should discuss this privately, Dad." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied. "I am making my own financial decisions now." David's face darkened. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Clara interrupted with a story about their honeymoon to Cape Cod, the destination they had chosen after receiving my modest wedding gift. The conversation shifted. The tension temporarily diffused. After dinner, as we moved into the living room for coffee and dessert, Susan cornered me in the kitchen. "Arthur, what is going on with you?" she demanded in a harsh whisper. "First, you refused to help with the honeymoon. Then, we hear nothing from you for months. And now, you're throwing money at Leo's little pipe dream," I replied calmly. "It's a solid business plan. Don't be naive. Bookstores aren't profitable anymore. He's using you." "No, Susan. I am supporting my grandson's ambition." "There is a difference." Her eyes narrowed. "David and I have been talking. We think it's time you consider moving somewhere more manageable. Silver Pines has lovely apartments, and the money from selling this house could help all of us." So, there it was. The plan Leo had overheard was now being brought out into the open. "This house is not for sale," I said firmly. "And my living arrangements are not up for family discussion." Before she could respond, David appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" "Just wonderful," I said, picking up the cake I had baked that morning. "Shall we have dessert?" In the living room, David cleared his throat as I began cutting the cake. "Before we move on, Dad, there's something Susan and I want to discuss with everyone." My hand stilled on the cake knife. This was not part of the evening I had planned. "We've been very concerned about Dad's decision-making lately," David announced to the room. "He's making unwise financial choices, isolating himself, and refusing to accept family guidance." A stunned silence fell over the room. "We think it's time to consider a power of attorney arrangement," he continued, "for his own protection." Mr. Harrison set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "That's a very serious step, David. Do you have evidence of diminished capacity?" "He's giving away money to fund a bookstore in the digital age," David replied, as if that explained everything. "And he's refusing to consider sensible downsizing options." I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This moment had been inevitable from the day I had first started saying no. "Your father seems perfectly competent to me," Mr. Harrison observed. "Making decisions that you disagree with is not evidence of incapacity." "You don't understand," David insisted, his voice rising. "He's always relied on Mom, and then on me for financial guidance. Now suddenly he's making all these irrational choices. Enough." I set down the cake knife. "I am not irrational, incapacitated, or in need of your guidance, David." "Dad, be reasonable." "I have been reasonable for 3 years. I interrupted. I have paid for renovations, vacations, cars, and a wedding. I have allowed you to treat me like a walking checkbook rather than your father. But that stops now. David's face flushed a dark red. Is this what you want? He demanded, gesturing around the table. To humiliate us in front of everyone? To make us look like villains? No, David, I said quietly. You have managed to do that all on your own, you selfish old man, he hissed, standing up so abruptly that his chair nearly toppled over. After everything we've done for you? David, Susan tugged at his arm, suddenly aware of how this was looking to their guests. But David was beyond caring. You think you can just cut us off? Mom would be ashamed of you. It was at that precise moment that Mr. Del Harrison cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change everything. Actually, David, he said, your mother anticipated this exact situation. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's words was absolute. David stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, as Mr. Harrison reached into his jacket and removed a familiar-looking envelope. Eleanor added a codicil to her will shortly before she passed. Mr. Harrison explained to the stunned room. She was concerned about how Arthur might be treated after she was gone. What kind of codicil? Susan demanded, finding her voice first. Mr. Harrison looked at me, silently asking for permission. I gave a slight nod. The codicil states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Arthur forfeits their entire inheritance. Mr. Harrison said, his voice unwavering. This includes treating him with disrespect, attempting to control his finances against his wishes, or trying to force him from his home. That's ridiculous, David sputtered. Mom would never. She did. Mr. Harrison interrupted. And as the executor of her estate, I have been documenting the incidents over the past several months. He turned to me. Arthur, I have to ask, do you wish to enforce the codicil? All eyes turned to me. I looked at David and Susan, their faces now pale with shock and a dawning sense of horror. I looked at Clara, who seemed confused and ashamed. Then I looked at Leo, whose expression held nothing but quiet, unwavering support. Yes, I said finally, I do. Richard collapsed back into his chair, as if his legs had given out. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied. The name tag at the wedding, the honeymoon announcement at the brunch, the constant demands for money, and now this blatant attempt to declare me incompetent. All of it stops today. But our inheritance, Susan whispered, is forfeit? Mr. Harrison confirmed. All of it? Clara asked, her voice small. Miss Harrison nodded. I'm afraid so. The codicil is quite clear on this point. This isn't fair, David suddenly shouted, slamming his fist on the table. He tricked us. He let us believe the money was just sitting there for us. No, David, I said quietly. I never promised you anything. You assumed, you took, and you demanded. But you never once stopped to ask what I needed or wanted. What about Clara and Simon? Susan asked desperately. They haven't done anything wrong. Mr. Harrison consulted his notes. Clara was present at several of the incidents but did not actively participate in the humiliation. However, she also never spoke up to defend Arthur. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Grandpa. I should have said something at the wedding about the name tag. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The question is what we learn from them. So, what happens now? Simon asked, putting a supportive arm around Clara. Now, Mr. Harrison said, according to the terms of the codicil, David and Susan's share of Eleanor's estate is to be redistributed. To whom? David demanded. Half goes to Arthur outright. Mr. Harrison explained. The other half is to be divided among any descendants who have shown him proper respect and care. All eyes turned to Leo, who looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear, Grandpa, I had no idea about any of this." "I know, my boy," I assured him. "Your grandmother would be so proud of the man you have become." Richard stood up again, his face contorted with rage. "This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll contest this in court." "You are welcome to try," Mr. Harrison said calmly. "But the codicil is legally binding, and we have ample evidence of the conditions for its enforcement being met." "Arthur," Susan began, her voice suddenly dripping with honeyed sweetness, "surely we can work this out as a family. We never meant—" "Save it, Susan," I cut in. "It's far too late for that." "So that's it?" David demanded. "After everything we have done for you, you're just cutting us off?" "No, David," I said, standing to face my son directly. "After everything I have done for you, I am finally standing up for myself. There is a difference." The gathering ended shortly after that. Clara and Simon left with awkward apologies and promises to call soon. David and Susan stormed out without another word. Mr. Harrison and the other guests made tactful exits, leaving just Leo and me in the sudden quiet of my home. "Are you okay?" he asked, helping me clear the barely touched dessert plates. "I'm better than okay," I replied, surprised to find that it was true. "I feel free." 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of the next chapter. The coffee shop and bookstore Leo had finally opened in a charming, converted Victorian house downtown. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves of carefully curated books and comfortable reading nooks. A coffee counter, staffed by Leo's girlfriend Emma, served locally roasted beans and homemade pastries. In the children's section, a mural I had painted covered one entire wall, a whimsical forest scene filled with hidden animals and fairy houses for young readers to discover. Twice a week, I led story time for the neighborhood children, something I had never imagined myself doing before. The small apartment upstairs had also been renovated. Not for me, I still loved my home with its cherished memories of Eleanor, but for a young writer-in-residence program that Leo had established with part of his inheritance. The bell over the door jingled, and Clara stepped in, pushing a stroller that held her 3-month-old daughter, Eleanor, named after her great-grandmother. "Grandpa," Clara called out, spotting me. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "Just dropping off some new bookmarks I painted," I said, bending down to admire baby Eleanor. "Hello, little one." Over the past year, Clara and I had slowly but surely rebuilt our relationship. After the initial shock of the inheritance revelation, she had made a genuine effort to connect with me, independently of her parents. Her husband, Simon, had proven to be a steadying influence, encouraging her to form her own opinions rather than simply echoing her mother's. David and Susan were a different story. After several failed attempts to contest the codicil, they had moved to Florida, where David had taken a job with a former business associate. Our communication was now limited to terse Christmas cards and occasional updates relayed through Clara. "Have you heard from your parents lately?" I asked as Clara settled at a small table with the baby. "Mom called last week," she said with a sigh. "Same conversation as always. Complaints about Dad's job, the smaller house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be," Clara said firmly. "They made their choices. I've made mine." Emma brought over coffees and fresh scones, cooing over the baby before returning to the counter. Leo emerged from the back room with a stack of new arrivals, his face lighting up when he saw us. "Perfect timing," he said, joining us at the table. "I wanted to run something by you both." He explained his idea for expanding the store's community programs, including literacy tutoring for adults and writing workshops for local teens. It would mean reinvesting some of the profits, he added, but I think it's worth it. I think it's wonderful, I said, feeling a surge of pride. As they discussed the details, I gazed around the sunlit bookstore. This beautiful space that represented not just Leo's dream, but a new chapter for all of us. In the years since that fateful birthday dinner, I had discovered parts of myself that had lain dormant for far too long. I had made new friends, developed my skills as a painter and woodworker, and even started traveling. Simple weekend trips at first, then 2 weeks in Italy with a senior tour group where I had met Beatrice, a kind-eyed widow from Montreal with a dry wit who now called me every Sunday. Eleanor would have approved, I thought, not just of the bookstore or my newfound independence, but of the boundaries I had finally learned to establish. She had tried to protect me with her codicil, but in the end, I had learned how to protect myself. Baby Eleanor let out a happy gurgle, drawing me back to the present. This was my family now. Not perfect, not complete, but real and true. We were building something new from the ruins of what had been lost, and in its own way, it was truly beautiful. "What do you think, Grandpa?" Leo asked, pulling me back into their conversation. I smiled at my grandson and my granddaughter, at the beautiful baby who represented our future, and at the bookstore that had grown from a foundation of trust and respect, rather than obligation and greed. "I think," I said, "that this is exactly where we are all supposed to be."